Welcome to Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we will continue with the tale of the Argonauts, beginning with the story of the Argonauts and the land of the Dolines. Winds from Thrace swept the ship toward the coast of Phrygia, where earth-born giants, untamed savages, lived side by side with the peaceful Dolines of the island of Sisyphus. These giants had 6 arms, 1 springing from each massive shoulder, and 2 from each side. The Doliones were descended from the sea god, who protected them against their monstrous neighbors. Their king was a devout Theseus. When news of the ship and its company of men reached the island, he and his entire people went to meet the Argonauts, received them hospitably, and urged them to anchor their ship in the harbor of their city. For an oracle given long ago bade the king greet the band of divine heroes with kindly words, and above all to refrain from fighting them. And so he supplied them with an abundance of wine and slaughtered beasts. He was still a youth, and his beard was just beginning to grow. His young wife, whom he had taken from her father's house not long before, was awaiting him in the palace. But obedient to the oracle, he stayed to share the stranger's meal. Then they told him of the aim and the purpose of their quest, and he instructed them what path to take. The next morning they climbed a high mountain, so that they might see for themselves where the island lay in the ocean. In the meantime, the giants had rushed forth from the other side and closed off the harbor with tremendous blocks of stone. But in the harbor lay the Argo, guarded by Heracles, who had again refused to leave the ship. When he saw the huge fellows begin working their mischief, he shot many of them to death with his arrows. And now the other heroes returned and wrought such havoc among the giants with their spears and arrows that they were utterly beaten, and lay in the narrow harbor like a forest of hewn trees, some with head and breast in the sea, and their feet on the sandy shore, others with their limbs in the water, and their breast and head on the strand, but all of them destined to be the prey of fishes and the food of birds. When the heroes had thus successfully emerged from the battle, they weighed anchor and sailed out to sea. But in the night the wind changed, and a storm drove in upon them on the opposite side, so that they were forced to cast anchor near land. This land was again the island of the hospitable Dolines. But the Argonauts thought they were on the coast of Phrygia. Nor did the erstwhile host, whom the noise of the landing had roused from sleep, recognize the friends with whom they had caroused so merrily only the day before. They reached for their arms, and an ill-starred battle himself thrust his spear into the heart of the king, and neither did the slayer, nor his victims, nor the victim the slayer. Finally, the Dolines put to flight and shut themselves up in the city. The next morning both sides saw their mistake. Jason, the leader of the Argonauts, and all his men were filled with bitter grief when they beheld that good king Sisyphus lying in his own blood. For 3 days the heroes and the Dolines came together and mourned their dead. They tore their hair and arranged bouts and funeral feasts in honor of the slain. Then the Argonauts set out on their way. But Calais, the wife of the fallen king, strangled herself with a rope, for she could not bear to go on living now that her husband was no more. Heracles Left Behind. After a stormy voyage, the heroes landed in the bay of Bithynia, where the city of Hylas lived. The Mysians who lived here received them kindly, heaped dry faggots for a fire to warm them, green leaves to make soft beds, and even though it was night, they served them with an abundance of wine and food. Heracles, who scorned all comforts, left his companions seated at their feast, and went off into the woods to carve himself a better oar for the work of the coming morning. He soon found a pine which seemed just what he wanted. Not too thick, with boughs and length and breadth somewhat like a slender poplar. He laid his bow and quiver aside, threw off his lion skin, put his club down next to him, gripped the trunk with both hands, and pulled the tree out by the roots, the earth still clinging to them, so that it looked as if a tempest had torn it from the ground. Now his young friend Hylas had also left the banquet, and he had risen and taken a bronze pitcher to draw water for his master and friend, in order to prepare for his return. On another expedition against the Dropes, Heracles had killed the boy's father in a dispute, but had taken Hylas himself and reared him as his servant and friend. When the beautiful boy reached the well, the moon was full and radiant. As he leaned over the water, pitcher in hand, the nymph of the well saw him, and was so charmed by his beauty that she twined her left arm around him, while with her right hand she clutched his elbow and drew him down into the depths. One of the heroes, Polyphemus by name, who was awaiting Heracles, and not far from the well, heard the boy cry out for help, but he could not find him. Just then he saw Heracles coming from the woods. "Must I be the first one to tell you the sad news?" Polyphemus called to him. "Your Hylas went to the well, and did not return. Robbers must have seized him, or perhaps wild animals. I myself heard him cry out in distress." When Heracles heard this, the sweat broke out on his forehead, and the blood beat painfully in his veins. Angrily he threw down the pine, and as a bull stung by the gadfly leaves the herd and the herdsman, he ran through the thickets to well, uttering cries of grief. The morning star stood over the mountain peak, and a favorable wind arose. The helmsman urged the heroes to make the most of it and come aboard. They were gliding along gaily in the faint flush of dawn, when too late they remembered that the two of their numbers, Polyphemus and Heracles, had been left behind. A stormy quarrel broke out over whether or not they should sail on without their valiant friends. Jason said nothing. He sat in silence, and sorrow gnawed at his heart. But Telamon was overcome with wrath. "How can you sit there so quietly?" he called to their leader. "I suppose you are afraid that Heracles might put your own prowess to shame? But why do I waste words? Even if all our companions agree with you, I alone should turn back to the man we have deserted." And with this he gripped Typhus, the helmsman, by the breast, and would have compelled him to put about for the land of the Mysians, had not Zetes and Calais, the two sons of Boreas, seized his arms and held him back with angry words. But while they were still contending with one another, Glaucus, a god of the sea, rose out of the foamy tide, grasped the stern of the ship with his strong arm, and called to the voyagers, "Do not quarrel, O heroes! You shall not take fearless Heracles with you to the land of Aeaeus, against the will of Zeus. Destiny has decreed other labors for him. A love-struck nymph stole Hylas, and Heracles has remained behind because of his yearning for him." After he had revealed these things, Glaucus sank back into the sea, and the dark waters swirled over him. Telamon was ashamed. He went to Jason, laid his hand in his, and said, "Do not bear me a grudge, Jason. Sorrow led me astray, and I spoke rash words. Let my fault be gone with the winds, and may we wish each other well as before." Jason was glad to make peace, and they journeyed over the waves with a fresh and fair breeze. Polyphemus made his home with the Mysians, and built them a city, but Heracles went on where the will of Zeus called him. Polydeuces and the king of the Bebrycians. The next morning at sunrise they cast anchor near a peninsula stretching far into the sea. Here Amycus, king of the wild Bebrycians, had his stables and country house. This sovereign had imposed an irksome rule about all strangers, that no one was to leave his territory without first having boxed with him. In this way he had already done away with a great number of his neighbors. On this occasion also he approached the ship which had just arrived, and challenged the oarsmen with mocking words. "Listen, you rovers of the sea," he called to them. "There is one thing you must know, that it is no stranger may quit my country without having boxed with me. So choose the best man among you and send him to me or your doom will be sealed." Now it happened that one of the Argonauts was the best boxer in Greece. Polydeuces, the son of Leda, stung by the challenge, he said to the king, "Do not wrangle with us. We are ready to obey your rules, and I am your man." The king of the Bebrycians looked at the bold hero, and his eyes rolled in their sockets, like those of a wounded mountain lion glaring at its assailant. But young Polydeuces was as serene as a star in the heavens, and swung his hands about in the air to see if what the long hours of rowing had done they had lost, or if they had lost their suppleness. When the heroes left the ship, the two boxers took up their positions opposite each other. One of the king's slaves threw the two pairs of boxing thongs on the ground between them. "Choose whichever pair you like," said Amycus. "I do not want to go to the trouble of selecting them by lot. You will soon be able to tell from your own experience that I am an excellent tanner and can darken the cheeks with blood." Polydeuces smiled quietly, took the thongs which lay nearest him, and had his friend strap them onto his hands. The king of the Bebrycians did the same, and now the boxing began. Like a breaker which rushes upon a ship and whose force the skilful helmsman counters only with great difficulty, the king hurled himself against the Greek and allowed him no breathing spell. Yet lithe Polydeuces always succeeded in dodging the onslaught and suffered no wounds. Soon he found out his adversary's weak side and dealt him many an unparried thrust. But the king, too, took his advantage where he saw it, and so jaws rang with the sound of blows, and teeth rattled with thwack after thwack. Nor did they stop until they both were panting, and had to stop to one side to rest, and dry the sweat streaming from every pore. Hardly had they resumed the bout when Amycus missed his opponent's head and struck only his shoulder, while Polydeuces hit him near the ear, so that the bones in his head cracked, and he dropped to his knees in great pain. The Argonauts shouted with joy, but the Bebrycians came to the aid of their king and attacked Polydeuces with their clubs and hunting spears. His companions whipped out their swords and threw them aside into the struggle. In the end, the Bebrycians were put to flight and sought refuge in the interior of their country. The heroes then entered their stables and seized the herds so that they had rich spoils. They spent the night ashore, bound up their wounds, and made offerings to the god. Nor did sleep weigh upon the lids as they passed the brimming cup. From laurel to which the ship was bound with ropes they broke sprays to wreath their brows, and sang a hymn of praise, while Orpheus plucked the strings of his lyre. The very shore seemed to listen in silent delight, while they sang of Polydeuces, victorious son of Zeus. Phineus and the Harpies. Dawn put an end to their feasting, and they continued on their way. After more adventures, they cast anchor opposite the land of Bithynia, in which Phineus, son of the hero Argonauts, now dwelt. This Phineus had been afflicted with great misfortune, because he had abused the gift of prophecy. Apollo had granted him. He had, in his old age, become blind, and these evil witch-like birds, the Harpies, would not allow him to eat his food in peace. They snatched whatever they could, and whatever food remained they polluted so intolerably that no one could touch it. Phineus had only one consolation, an oracle of Zeus, to the effect that he would eat unmolested when the sons of Boreas came with the Greek oarsmen. And so when the old man heard of the arrival of the Argo, he left his chamber, starved to a very skeleton, a mere shadow. His limbs trembled with weakness. He supported his tottering steps with a staff, and when he reached the Argonauts, he sank to the ground in exhaustion. They surrounded the unhappy man, appalled at his appearance. When he heard them about them and had collected his strength, he spoke to them pleadingly. "Oh, noble heroes, if you are really those foretold by the oracle, help me. For the goodness of vengeance have not only taken my eyesight, but have also sent upon me these horrid birds to deprive me of my food. You will not be giving your aid to a stranger, for I am a Greek, Phineus, the son of Agenor. Once I was king of Thrace, and the sons of Boreas, who must be partners in your quest, and are destined to save me, are the younger brothers of Cleopatra, who was my wife in that land." At these words, Zetes, the son of Boreas, threw himself into the arms of the king and promised that with the help of his brother he would free him from these preying birds. Then they prepared men for him. But scarcely had the king touched the food when the Harpies headed down from the clouds like a gale and greedily perched on the platters. The heroes shouted and cried out, but the birds were undisturbed and stayed until they had devoured the very last crumb. Then they flew into the air, leaving a horrible stench behind. Zetes and Calais, the sons of Boreas, pursued them with drawn swords, and Zeus lent them wings and untiring strength, which they had need of. For indeed the Harpies sped faster than the swift western wind, but the sons of Boreas were close on their trail, and at times could almost lay hands on the monsters. At last they were so near that they would certainly have slain them, had not Iris, the messenger of Zeus, suddenly appeared and addressed the two heroes. "Sons of Boreas," she said, "the Harpies sent by Zeus must not be slain by the sword, but I swear to you by the Styx, on which the gods take their oath, that these birds shall no longer trouble the son of Agenor." At that, Zetes and Calais gave up the pursuit and returned to the ship. In the meantime, the Greek heroes busied themselves about the aged Phineus and prepared a sacrificial feast, to which they invited the starving old man. Avidly he ate of the clean and abundant food, though he seemed to be satisfying his hunger as if in a dream. Night came, and while they were awaiting the return of the sons of Boreas, King Phineus made them a prophecy in gratitude for what they had done for him. "First," he said, "you come to the Symplegades, narrows of the Euxine Sea. These are two steep, rocky islands, which have no roots in the bottom of the ocean, but are afloat in the water. Often the current drives them towards each other, and then the tide between them swells with turbulent force. If you do not want to be ground to splinters along with all that you possess, row through them as swiftly as a dove flies. After that you will come to the land of Myrmidine, which boasts the entrance to the underworld. You will pass among other promontories, rivers, and coasts, the women's state of the Amazons, and the land of the Chalybes, who dig iron out of the earth by the sweat of their brows. Finally, you will come to the coast of Colchis, where the river Ephesus pours its broad stream into the sea, and you will see the towered stronghold of King Aeetes, and there the sleepless dragon guards the golden fleece, which is spread over the topmost boughs of an oak tree." As the heroes listened to the old man, they could not suppress a shudder, and were just about to question him further, when the sons of Boreas flew down into their midst and gladdened the king with a message of the lovely Iris. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends.